everybody, and welcome to the Mind of Marlin and another treetop talk. The ducks are fed, the chickens are fed, and now it's time to feed your head. In a recent interview with David Quammen, the author of a 2012 book entitled Spillover: Animal Infections and the New Human Pandemic, I got the idea for this next piece. Here in the U.S., we've all been COVIDed to death. Well, not quite all, just at last count, 340,000. According to the Department of Veteran Affairs, in World War II, there were 291,557 battle deaths. Other deaths, non-theater, were 113,842. In the American War total, from 1775 till 1991, battle deaths, 651,031. Other deaths in theater, 308,800. So, looking at this, more people have died of COVID by a factor of 2 than all of the other battle deaths in the American Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Indian Wars, the Mexican Wars, the Spanish-American War, World War I, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, which only had a total of 144,536 battle deaths. Now, the Veteran Affairs makes a distinction as many other deaths happen, but not from battle, just being close enough to being fatal. They call those non-theater deaths or in-theater deaths. Looking at the statistics, what I've learned is don't go into that theater. More people are dying in there. Either that or the show is bombing or the comic on stage is killing them. Now, what does this have to do with Mr. Quammen's interview? He says, and I quote, "Part of the problem is that national leaders don't want to spend a lot of money on preparedness against something that might not happen between now and the next election. The fact that it might cost tens of billions of dollars to create a network of preparedness against the pandemic sounds like a lot if the pandemic hasn't occurred on your watch. But we now know that tens of billions of dollars is chicken feed compared to what an actual global pandemic cost economies." End quote. And because I have a chicken here, I happen to know what chicken feed really costs. It's not much. This brings me back to making war. How much money does the U.S. already spend on preparing for something that may not happen in the form of military equipment? According to Business Insider, the U.S. has spent almost $2 trillion on Iraq as of February 2020. We invaded Iraq in 2003. We have spent just over $117 billion every year on a war that is a long way from here. But we're told that we're fighting these wars to protect our freedom. How? How does a war that far away protect us? We apparently went to war right after 9/11 looking for weapons of mass destruction. It sounds like the virus could be called that. Back when it was built, the World Trade Towers only cost $400 million to construct, or $2.27 billion in 2018 dollars. We went to war right after the World Trade Towers was blown up. We could have rebuilt the World Trade Towers 50 times with just 1 year's budget on these wars. Think of what we could have saved if we had put it in our country. If we didn't go to war and just rebuilt with the same amount of money we spent in Iraq, we could have constructed 3,108 World Trade Towers. We could have created high-speed rail. We could have created 40 million jobs, each paying $50,000 a year. Spending $147 million per school, we could have built 13,000 new ones, or 260 new schools per state. We could have given every single person in the U.S., all 320 million of us, a check for $8,000 instead of the $600 we're getting. We built weapons with the hopes of never having to go to war. But if there's a profit to be made in going to war, we will find a reason to do it, even if it means making one up, as we did with the WMDs. But let me offer some perspective on the tactical possibilities of America's freedom really being threatened. Isn't that what they tell us, to keep America safe, which is why we send our people and our money overseas? Here's a map of America. Notice that there are 2 oceans on either side of it that are thousands of miles wide. Unless we are invaded by Mexico, which some people think has already happened, and that's why there's so many taco trucks, or invaded by Canada, which some people think has happened because that's why we play hockey, an invading force would have to cross the ocean, just like we did when we sent 5,000 ships and 150,000 soldiers to Europe for the invasion of Normandy. The beachhead was only 50 miles wide. Here is Normandy. Here is the totality of Europe. Then, here's a comparison to the size of the U.S. Here's some maps to provide a sense of scale. 50 miles of coastal beachhead in the U.S. would be like from Savannah, Georgia to Sapelo Island, Georgia. NOAA's official value for the total length of U.S. shorelines is 95,471 miles. So 50 miles, the same amount we and the Allied forces were able to land in France, is 0.05237% of the total coastline of the U.S. Small Arms Survey estimates that American civilians own 393 million guns, both legally and otherwise, out of a worldwide total of 857 million firearms. So we have Americans have 45% of all the guns with only 4% of the world's population. Are you seeing where I'm going with this? If we divide this up, each state would have 7,860,000 firearms. Let's look at that map again. Between China and the U.S. is damn near 6,500 miles. From Normandy to Georgia, it's 4,135 miles. Let's hypothesize another country was really and truly trying to threaten our safety and our hometowns. 1. U.S. satellite surveillance would see this armada being mobilized before it ever left the shores of another country. 2. U.S. bombers, missiles, drones would be capable of hitting these targets during the crossing, which would take weeks. 3. If an armada really did try to land forces in Georgia, the amount of firepower in the hands of civilians alone would be formidable. And you would know there'd be so many people with itchy trigger fingers who just want to shoot something, as we seem to be doing a great job shooting each other in this country, with gun deaths amounting to over 13,000 people in 2018. So to bring this full circle, we don't have the political will to pay for pandemic preparedness, but have the political will to fund foreign wars that are sold to the public as keeping us safe. After the fact that we've spent trillions on COVID-19 when we could have spent tens of billions to prevent the spread of the virus, instead we're spending trillions of dollars to respond to it. We have spent trillions of dollars just on the Iraq war that are supposed to keep us safe from foreign enemies. None of us feel safer from Iraq when our families, friends, neighbors, and loved ones are dying at the rate of 1 every 30 seconds because of this virus. To put it in perspective, if you had $1 trillion bills and stacked them up, your Tower of Money would be almost 68,000 miles tall, which would get you about a third of the way to the moon, which would make it much easier for the cow to jump over it if he climbs the stack first. Department of Defense budget is approximately $721 billion in 2020. And few people died in our wars, which is good news. The bad news is, had we spent 10% of our military budget on preparedness for the pandemic, 70 billion, 200 million, we would not have more people dead from this virus than in World War II, or twice as many of all of the other wars combined. So the next time any politician tells you we need to fund our military to keep us safe, ask yourself the question, what chance would any other nation have to try to land on a beach in the U.S. and then march a military force from Georgia to California, from Texas to Minnesota, without getting some serious whoop ass? Ask the politician, why is it okay to charge me $8,000 for the Iraq war, but there isn't enough to pay $2,000 when my family is going hungry and we can't make rent. Georgia is a battleground state, but not in the way we imagine. And it will be the voters, not the gun-toters, who decide the fate of this nation. Imagine that. Thank you so much for tuning in. You have a lovely and wonderful new year. Aloha.